Good morning, everyone. Last time we have explained about ecological pyramids. Today we are going to explain about eutrophication in lakes and rivers. Friends, the excessive quantity of nutrients in water may cause eutrophication. Eutrophication indicates the increased input of organic waste containing nutrients such as nitrates and phosphates in water. Decomposition of sewage and domestic waste makes the water rich in nutrients. Due to phosphates and nitrates, water becomes highly productive or turbid or eutrophic and thus is called as eutrophication. So, the eutrophication means there is a rise or increase in a productivity of the pond or lakes, and the productivity of ponds leads to into the growth and rapid development of undesired flora and fauna, and this leads to the transformation of good quality of the water resulting into a bad quality of the water that will not remain usable for the human being. Friends, natural eutrophication is very slow process and water resources remains nutrient deficient for hundreds of years. Means the natural eutrophication is very slow process and this is because of uh, the safe and the safety of the natural water resources due to the lack of human interference or the human activities which are mainly responsible for the pollution and the contamination of the aquatic water resources. And thus natural eutrophication is very slow process and water resources remains nutrient deficient for hundreds of years and do not support much of the aquatic life. So ultimately, due to the lack of large quantity of the nutrients in the water, there is no growth of aquatic flora and fauna in the natural conditions. When the water bodies are not enriched, when the water bodies are not enriched with nutrients, are called as oligotrophic. Means oligotrophic ponds or the freshwater resources or the water bodies, they shows uh, some sort of limited flora and fauna in the pond or in the particular water reservoir and thus have small number of plants and animal population. So due to the oligotrophic condition, there are limited plants and animals present in the water resources and water of such pond is very much clear and blue in color. So this is the normal feature of the oligotrophic ponds or the oligotrophic aquatic water bodies. But when there is a tremendous increase in a quantity of the organic waste like a sewage or the domestic waste when are released into the nearby water resources due to the human activities, that is the drainages, particularly the drainages from the cities or towns or the metropolitan cities which are drained or released into the nearby water resources, and this will lead to the contamination or the pollution of the particular water resource and resulting into increase in the nutrients like phosphates, nitrates, etc. And this will ultimately lead into the fast or a rapid growth of aquatic flora and fauna, resulting into the process of eutrophication. So eutrophication leads to the increased productivity of the water resource, and this will result into the growth of undesired flora and fauna, and this will lead to the growth of undesired uh, flora like the algal blooms which floats onto the surface of the water, and this will prevent the penetration of the sunlight in the water, and thus preventing the process of photosynthesis of the aquatic plants in the water resource where there is a growth of undesired weeds or the algal blooms, and ultimately this will reduce uh, the rate of process of photosynthesis, and ultimately will result into the increased concentration of carbon dioxide, and at the same time the algal flora together with the algal flora or the algal blooms together with the increased number of aquatic organisms, and the water will become oxygen deficient and increasing biological oxygen demand due to the increased quantity of carbon dioxide. So, the eutrophication is a sort of destruction of the water resource due to the increased productivity or the nutrients, resulting into the undesired growth of flora and fauna, resulting into increased biological oxygen demand, and ultimately the water of the pond or the aquatic reservoirs will become turbid or toxic, rich in carbon dioxide, and this will become harmful for the aquatic flora and fauna of the respective water reservoirs. The increased human activities, mainly the increased human activities leads to artificial eutrophication, and which is the fast process. The artificial or the man-made eutrophication is a fast process than that of the natural eutrophication. So, the increased human activities such as release of domestic waste or agricultural or plant residues, drainages, and industrial waste when reach to the water bodies. This leads to increased amount of nutrients from organic waste due to the action of aerobic bacteria in presence of oxygen. So in presence of oxygen, the aerobic bacteria leads to the decomposition of the organic waste and releasing the large quantity of nutrients in the form of nitrates or phosphates. Excess of nutrients, excess amount of nutrients induce changes in the ecosystem balance and the composition. So ultimately this will result into many transformation or the changes in the ecosystem or aquatic ecosystem, resulting into change in the balance and composition of the water resource that leads into a growth of algae in water. So due to increased quantity of nitrates and phosphates, at first the algae or the aquatic vegetations, undesired, particularly unwanted or undesired algal blooms or the weeds grows fast in the water, and this results into shift of algal flora and blue green algae. This forms algal blooms, which forms a floating blanket on the water surface. The algal blooms prevents the entry of sunlight into water and thereby prevents the process of photosynthesis of large aquatic plants. So, there are there are several changes taking place in the aquatic ecosystem. There are several changes or transformation taking place in the aquatic ecosystem due to increased quantity of organic waste and the decomposition of these organic waste in a presence of oxygen or with the help of aerobic bacteria leads into the utilization of oxygen uh, by the bacteria for the decomposition purpose. Then another thing, that is process of photosynthesis stops due to the growth of algal blooms that will form a floating blanket of the algal blooms on the surface of the aquatic resource, and this leads to the prevention or penetration of the sunlight. So sunlight will not pass into the water below through the aquatic flora in the form of algal blooms, which has grown as a floating on the surface, and this will prevent the entry of sunlight into the water, ultimately preventing the photosynthesis in a large aquatic plants. And this results into rise of unwanted aquatic flora and fauna in a water due to increased amount of nutrients. So, main cause of the eutrophication is the increased quantity of the nutrients that will result into the growth of unwanted aquatic flora and fauna or plants and animals, and thus water becomes turbid, toxic and oxygen deficient. So, this will increase biological oxygen demand due to the decreased quantity of oxygen, but the animal or the fauna, whatever present in the eutrophic pond or eutrophic water, will not get adequate supply of oxygen due to increased quantity of the carbon dioxide in the water. So, the water becomes turbid, toxic and oxygen deficient, resulting into death of the fish. So, ultimately in the final stage of the eutrophication, due to increased number of flora and fauna, undesired flora and fauna, there is a death of fish, then other aquatic organisms and birds due to increased carbon dioxide in water. So ultimately, these are the adverse situation or the unfavorable condition get produced in the aquatic ecosystem due to increased quantity of nutrients or the productivity, and this will result into the undesired growth or rapid multiplication of aquatic flora and fauna, and this will lead into the increased quantity of carbon dioxide, and the carbon dioxide will not be used for the process of photosynthesis due to the formation of algal blooms on the surface of water. So ultimately the process of photosynthesis will stop, and there is no release of oxygen by the plants. So ultimately the animals or the aquatic organism dies due to suffocation or due to the lack of oxygen in water. Water body thus becomes eutrophic or get destroyed completely, and it shows decreased oxygen, increased carbon dioxide and biological oxygen demand. Eutrophication is thus become a limiting factor in the supply of clean water for drinking, fishing and the navigation. So, This is the uh, a problem. This is the problem created only due to the human activities. So human activities are solely responsible. Human activities, increased human activities are thus solely responsible for the process of eutrophication. And this happens mainly due to the release of sewage and domestic waste or the drainages, even agriculture residues or industrial effluents, when released in the nearby water resource from the towns or the cities, leading into the water pollution first, and this will lead to undesired changes with the aquatic resources like lakes and rivers. So the water quality of the water of the oligotrophic aquatic resources like ponds, rivers, or lakes with a good quality of the water, clear water, blue water, which is uh, containing less number or less quantity of the aquatic flora and fauna. But due to increased quantity of phosphates and nitrates or sewage or domestic waste or organic waste in the water leads into increased productivity of the water, and due to large quantity of nutrients, ultimately the phytoplanktons or undesired flora or the aquatic plants get increased in a large number. So due to increased quantity of phytoplanktons or the aquatic vegetation, ultimately this will lead into a ideal condition for the growth of aquatic fauna or the small uh, aquatic organisms or the invertebrates together with a large quantity of zooplankton get increased in the pond water. So ultimately, due to the increased quantity of phytoplankton or zooplankton, the the herbivore or the carnivore type of fishes will begin to multiply or begin to grow in a large number because of uh, availability of the plenty of food in the form of either phytoplanktons or zooplanktons for the herbivorous or the carnivorous type of fishes or other aquatic fauna or the aquatic organisms. So ultimately there is increased number of the aquatic fauna or the organisms. So ultimately due to the uh, increased activity of the aquatic organism like respiration will lead into increased quantity of dissolved carbon dioxide in the water, and at the same time due to increased uh, quantity of undesired flora in the form of algal blooms or the aquatic vegetation will form a surface or the floating blanket of the aquatic weeds or the algal blooms. So this will thus stop the penetration of the sunlight in water. So this due to this, the process of photosynthesis in the aquatic plants or the green algae or the aquatic large aquatic plants will stop their process of photosynthesis. So ultimately, no oxygen will be released by the aquatic plants, and so algal blooms will increase in a quantity and covers the entire surface of water. So in a uh, next period of the formation of algal blooms or the development of aquatic flora, undesired algal blooms on the surface, so process of photosynthesis will stop, and the oxygen, dissolved oxygen, whatever present in the water, that will be utilized by the aquatic organisms for the respiration, And after the cease or arresting the process of photosynthesis, there is no further addition of oxygen in the water. So ultimately, the entire fauna or the aquatic organisms get killed due to the lack of oxygen. So, due to the respiratory activities of the organisms, carbon dioxide amount of carbon dioxide will get increased, but that will not be used by the aquatic plants for the process of photosynthesis. So, there is an increase of biological oxygen demand. So, for the process of respiration, the quantity of oxygen is essential, and that will be completely uh, finished, or that will not remain there. Oxygen is now not present in the water for the process of respiration of the aquatic organisms, which is released by the aquatic plants through the process of photosynthesis together with the surface of water can also trap some amount of the oxygen from the atmospheric gases or the air. But due to presence of the layer of floating layer of algal blooms on the surface, there is no chance of dissolving oxygen from the air in the water, and another source of the oxygen, that is a process of photosynthesis, that has also stopped due to the large quantity or the growth of the undesired flora on the surface. Then, due to increased quantity of nutrients in the water, due to increased quantity of nutrients in water, have resulted into the growth of not only the algae or the aquatic plants, but the zooplanktons or the phytoplanktons, which has also increased in a large quantity. So, due to the increased quantity of phytoplanktons, the aquatic organisms which are feeding onto the phytoplanktons may be the smaller invertebrates like crabs, crustaceans, worms, aquatic insects, larvae, or the mollusk like bivalve or the gastropods. So, which are feeding on to the phytoplankton. So, number of which will get increased. And due to the respiration, increased respiratory activities of the aquatic organisms, oxygen, dissolved oxygen present in the water, it is completely finished and resulting into the presence of only large quantity of carbon dioxide in the water. So, this will result into the total destruction of the plant, aquatic organisms or the plants. Ultimately, in the last phase of the eutrophication, the aquatic fauna or the organisms like fish get killed due to the suffocation or the lack of oxygen in the water. So, water will become turbid or toxic and will not remain with a, will not remain suitable for the human consumption or for navigation or the fishing. So ultimately, the eutrophication leads into the total destruction of the pond, and thus this becomes a limiting factor in the supply of clean water for drinking, fishing, and the navigation. Then this is the image showing eutrophication in a pond. So in this image we can see there is a surface layer of the algal blooms which has covered the entire surface of the water, which has covered. So this is the aquatic pond or a water or the aquatic ecosystem showing the formation of algal blooms on the surface of the water, and this is at the stage of eutrophication. So this is the image showing eutrophication or the process of eutrophication in the pond, and This will lead into uh, the transformation. There are several transformations. This will lead into a transformation of the a good quality of water into a bad or poor quality of the water, resulting into a turbid water, toxic water, or the simply this will not remain suitable for the uh, for its use either for fishing purpose or drinking purpose or the navigation purpose, and this process is called as eutrophication. So eutrophication is resulting only due to increased human activities like termination or drainage or draining or releasing the different type of organic waste in the water. So this is what about the process of eutrophication, and uh, thus today we'll stop here. Next time we'll continue with third topic, that is a population.